So, hi, Anna, and welcome to the Mama Village.
Hello, thank you for having me.
I'm super excited to have you on here today. And do you want to start by telling the listeners a bit about yourself? So, who you are, your age, who's in your family, and where you're from.
Yep, so I'm Anna. I'm 28. We live in Adelaide, me and my husband, with a couple of dogs and a 3.5-year-old son, Thomas, and a 15-month-old girl, Holly. And I'm a midwife as well, so I guess that adds to some extra knowledge and things. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize you're a midwife as well. That's very exciting. I love having experts on the show tell about their birth experiences too. I think it just adds to that extra layer of understanding and knowledge, and that just gets me super excited.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your first pregnancy with your 3.5-year-old. So, did
Yeah.
you do anything to prepare to conceive?
A little bit. We had been married just over 12 months and we'd bought a house and we'd sort of finished renovating the most of it. So we thought, all right, might be ready for kids. I got a blood test at a GP just to check some basic things. And we literally talked about it. All this happened within not even a week. And then next thing you know, I ovulated and we were having a baby. So
Wow.
um, it was very lucky, obviously, to conceive quite so easily. But yeah, it definitely, I don't think I was expecting that we'd quite made that decision quite so quickly, but it happened. So yeah, stoked, but yeah, shocked too.
Yeah, of course. Oh, that's amazing. So, then
Yeah.
how were you feeling physically and emotionally throughout your pregnancy?
So that was pretty rough. As far as being pregnant, I was excited and it was great. And I think being a midwife, you always dream about what it will be like to feel all the sensations that you talk to women about all the time. But I had hyperemesis and started feeling sick from 4 weeks with both of them. So yeah, that was really harsh and really definitely threw me down a bit of a spiral pretty quickly. I mean, in his pregnancy, I had hope that it would just ease at that 12 weeks or 16 weeks or 20 weeks. I kept setting new milestones. And I think by about 20 weeks, I was like, okay, we're in it for the long run. So, yeah, that was definitely a challenge that was obviously physically difficult, but it was the mental aspect of just feeling like a useless wife, useless at work, useless friend, just not good at anything on top of feeling rubbish. So I guess that was the tricky part about pregnancy, especially in his. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard similar experiences from other women that go through hyperemesis. It's just so debilitating physically
Yes.
and emotionally. And I can't even imagine what that must be like. Was there anything that you found helped throughout your pregnancy with your symptoms?
Yeah, so I tried all the drugs. None of them, some of them would stop me from vomiting if I just couldn't keep fluids down. I could eventually get on top of that, but they never took the nausea away. And the nausea is what totally killed my mood and, just your everyday, ability to function was just constantly feeling like I had a vomit ready in my throat. And if I opened my mouth or looked the wrong way or thought the wrong thing, it would just come up. So that, yeah, I did try acupuncture, tried all the pressure points and those seasickness bands and lots of things like that. None of that seemed to work at all. The only thing I found was that if I had a coffee, I'd get a couple of hours of feeling less nauseous, which obviously being pregnant was difficult because I couldn't have a coffee every couple of hours because you're trying to watch your caffeine intake. So that became okay, I'll have one good coffee a day. Also, coffee tasted disgusting while pregnant. So then there was the challenge of having to, I'd make a strong but very small volume and just scull it like it was a shot or something and just take it. And then I'd get a couple of hours. But yeah, I had to time it for the most productive thing I needed to do in the day, I guess, whether that was to get me to work or whether that was, to do certain jobs or get somewhere. Then I had to time it right. But yeah, it was tricky. That's, to say the least. So,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, I can't even imagine. So then, what was your perception of birth before you fell pregnant, and did that evolve throughout your pregnancy?
I think it was always pretty positive in that being a midwife, obviously, I'd experienced birth, I'd watched women, be so powerful and amazing. Obviously, you see all spectrums of birth that looks like it's really easy, and birth that looks like that woman is working really hard. You see all the spectrums, but I guess I had faith that I was young and fit and healthy. And apart from the hyperemesis, I was low risk in every other way. I had a healthy baby and I was keeping enough fluids down that my body was maintaining everything fine enough. So I was pretty keen for birth, and I think I had a fairly positive outlook that I trusted my body. I think I knew that women's bodies, obviously, people say built for birth is a bit difficult term because not everyone's body or baby goes so smoothly and they feel like they've failed. So that's, yeah, but I guess I felt, yeah, pretty confident that my body could do it. So, yeah.
Yeah, nice. And so, just a bit on your midwifery background as well. At that time, were you working in the hospital or were you a private midwife? What was that like?
At the start of his pregnancy, I was working in the hospital, and then during his pregnancy, I moved to a midwifery group practice model. So that was still through the same hospital, but obviously out in the community and doing home births and things as well, and working out of a birth centre as opposed like it's connected to the hospital, but obviously that bit separated too. So yeah, that was really good, I guess, in filling my mind with positive birth stories in the flesh.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah,
For
yeah.
sure. And so then what was your chosen model of care?
So I went through that same model. I guess in being a midwife, then I had the benefit of I could choose who I wanted as my midwife and ask them very early on. So that was, yeah, definitely very lucky because I know any other people that just go through the clinic and ask for group practice, it's not anywhere near that simple. And you certainly don't get a choice in who your care provider is. So that was one perk of birthing where you worked, I suppose. But
Yeah,
yeah,
an amazing one.
yeah, and so I chose someone who I'd done a lot of my university studies with, so I feel like they'd mentored me a lot. And then, yeah, I really admired their style. I guess you get to witness a lot as a midwifery student, so that was definitely one that I thought I would emulate them over many others. So yeah, I felt very
Yeah.
safe in her care.
Oh, nice. And then what did you do to prepare physically and mentally for birth?
We did a hypnobirthing course at, oh, I reckon I started at 32 weeks, maybe. Yeah, I reckon it was 32 to 36 weeks. Probably left it a little bit late. Other than that, I felt like I always thought I would have done, yoga or something, but I was just too unwell to get the motivation to get out of the house to do any of that. I guess the tricky bit of that story is that his birth was that from 28 weeks, he turned breech. So then I guess that changed things where I was thinking about not just preparing for birth, but prepping to turn this baby. So then that got pretty in depth. So by 28 weeks, when I didn't feel him turn breech, but it was very distinct remembering feeling, oh, there's a big head under my ribs. That's different and very obvious to me. And the kicks obviously changed. So I got my midwife to confirm it. And then I didn't really care too much until we hit sort of 30, 32 weeks. And then I started to be a lot more concerned that, okay, I'm getting further along. It's my first baby. So you've got the tighter abdominal muscles, babies don't turn as easily. And so I was getting a bit more concerned that I needed to be proactive while the baby was small enough to still turn around. So definitely tried lots of things. People talked about doing swimming. So I did swimming. Apparently that buoyancy of being in the water helped, which was definitely tricky with hyperemesis. But I had a friend that came along and did it with me and helped me out, which was great. I did acupuncture right from the start. From 34 weeks, I did the moxa sticks on my little toes, which was really challenging to reach with a big belly in the way. I was like, how am I meant to get to my
What are the
toes?
moxa sticks?
It's a herb, I believe, like through Chinese medicine. I assume it's
Yeah.
all linked with the acupuncture. And the idea is that you're just smoking them or burning them near your little toe, your pinky toe. And I believe it's something to do with it's either the light waves or the heat waves or something to do with it. It's, yeah, meant to obviously connect to some energy point. It is actually something that a bunch of the obstetricians at work suggested I try as well. So I haven't looked into the research of it, but I presume if they're bringing it up, that maybe there might actually be some research because they can usually be pretty quick to dismiss non-Western medicine. So the
Yeah.
fact that they brought it up, there might be some evidence. But yeah, definitely tried that. Didn't work. Um, because I was doing hypnobirthing, I tried like the hypnobirth breech turn track. So I listened to that, did all of the spinning babies maneuvers and doing like the inversions and everything. I think by 35 weeks, I went to a chiropractor and got her to help try and align things. I wasn't a huge believer in chiropractics before that, but I was like, I'll try anything. And yeah, nothing worked in the end, but definitely gave everything a red hot crack. Yeah.
Were you eligible or did you try the EC, is it called an ECV?
hmm Yeah. Yeah. ECV, external cephalic version. So I did have one at 36 and 6, and they got the baby. He wasn't engaged in my pelvis, so they got him out and they turned him halfway, like he got from his head from up the top to all the way down the side and his bottom, so he was completely transverse, but then he sprung back, and he sprung back twice. And it's quite unusual in that usually once you get a baby out the pelvis and most of the way, they just take themselves the rest of the way. So yeah, obviously it didn't work. I thought I'd be really devastated about that, but somehow I felt quite at ease almost. It was almost like my body was like, yeah, well, he was always going to be breech. This is just the way he needs to be for whatever reason. And I think once we did have the birth, it was clear to me why. Obviously, at the time, I felt concerned that, is it my pelvis? There's something wrong with my pelvis. Is there an abnormality with my baby? Like they say, don't quote me on this, but I think it's like 10% of all breech births, the baby has an abnormality, and that can be the reason why they're breech. And then I'm starting to think, is my baby one of those? And yeah, what does the future look like for us potentially? But yeah, so he didn't turn. But so from there, I talked to the doctor, and they were happy for me to look down the path of a vaginal breech birth, and that they wanted me to have a growth ultrasound, and suggested that, yeah, we'll see if he looks like he's growing evenly, if he's well positioned, if the cord wasn't around his neck, just, had to tick off a whole bunch of things. And then they talked about, for me to labour, it had to be spontaneous, ideally without an epidural, so that I could have full movement. And my baby had to be within like a fairly strict growth weight. So they weren't going to do it if he was too small or too big. They weren't going to do it if his head and his belly were discoordinate in their percentiles. So there was quite a lot of, and I believe I had to go into labour potentially before 40 weeks, I think, as well. So obviously a whole lot of expectations that is pretty tricky for, I think, any human to meet. But
Yeah.
I mean, I was lucky that they didn't. Well, I was glad that they didn't come up with straight brick walls saying, well, you'll have to have a cesarean. I liked that the table, I guess the door was always open. There were always options.
Yeah.
So I liked that. Yeah.
And so then how are you feeling at that point? Did you reach a point where you were like, okay, I am going to try for this vaginal birth? Or yeah, what was your process like?
Yeah. I think for me, I knew that every female in my family had had straightforward, well, mostly spontaneous labours, but like straightforward births. No one had had particular difficulties. Everyone was a fairly reasonable sized baby. My husband is only a tiny bit taller than me, so I didn't think, and my belly felt appropriate. I didn't feel like I had a huge baby on board. And I guess I had some pretty strong beliefs in that breech is not necessarily a pathological part of pregnancy. It's a version of normal. It's different, but it's like not necessarily a complexity. So I was pretty adamant that I would happily have a cesarean for, a complication that was, yeah, I guess life-saving to me or my baby, and I didn't think that breech was necessarily one. I also wanted my baby ideally to choose their birthday, to have like my waters break and have that microbiome transfer, and just being a birth nerd and really wanting to give birth a crack. Obviously cesareans are a form of birth, and it's not to take that credit away from any woman that has a cesarean, but for me, I was super keen to try labour, see what would happen. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think I was definitely keen to have that growth ultrasound. And I think within my own risk profile, I probably would have booked a cesarean, like my due date, I think, was a Saturday. So I would have booked a cesarean for maybe the Monday or Tuesday after my due date. I don't think I could have coped with being post dates and breech. I think that would have been a bit much for me, with the hyperemesis on top that lasted right until like all through labor. I don't think I had the capacity to cope with all of that. So yeah, I think I would have chosen a cesarean after term. But yeah, I guess
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
where I
Okay.
was at mostly.
But I love everything that you've said about how breech is just a variation of normal, and yeah, and the all the reasons about wanting to give vaginal birth a crack. And I love birth nerds. I just
Yeah.
get so excited
Yeah. I guess
when
that's
I
why we're here, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
totally, totally.
Yeah.
So then
Yeah.
how are you feeling towards the end of your pregnancy coming up to your due date?
Yeah, so I guess I felt, so that ECV was the 36 and 6, and I was expected to feel really defeated by that. And obviously, like I said, I didn't. I felt relieved almost, like, oh, yeah, well, of course. So I guess on the weekend, then we did a few just last minute house things that we hadn't really done yet. And then by the Monday, at 37 and 2, I lost my mucus plug, which I was quite shocked about, because I was like, surely if this baby was ever near my pelvis, well, that completely got taken away when I had the ECV and they got him out again. So I was a bit confused by all of this. I mean, I felt like potentially my baby had engaged a bit, but you're also a bit like, well, is that really possible? Yeah, so I had that happen on the Monday, and then the Tuesday night my waters broke, and the rest is history. I didn't get to the growth scan, I didn't get to anything else, and I'm really thankful for that in the end.
Wow. So yes, walk us through the beginning of your labor. So
Yeah.
you said your waters broke. Other than you losing your mucus plug, was that the first sign?
Yeah, so we went on a walk before dinner with the dogs, and I had to stop a couple of times for Braxton Hicks, which I hadn't done before, but they certainly, I wouldn't have called them painful. They were just tighter, and they were certainly not consistent, but maybe it did, maybe every 10 minutes or so, I had to stop on the walk. So it might have only been like five of them or something, but came home, had dinner. There was nothing else there. I just assumed that, oh yeah, well, you're 37 weeks, things get uncomfortable. So yeah, went to bed, turned out the light, and I'm pretty sure it was just a few minutes before 11 p.m. that I felt this big pop, and there was so much fluid that obviously the midwife in me then started to panic. Is a cord, like his umbilical cord, gonna come out as well? Because if there's this much fluid going everywhere, clearly there's not a bottom blocking, my cervix to stop anything else coming out. Like, this is ridiculous. But thankfully there obviously wasn't. But yeah, I think there was like, it was like two full towels worth and a pregnancy pillow, just everything was drenched. So obviously I called the hospital, and the midwife just did the classic thing of, what makes you think your water's broke? And I'm going, because there is liters of fluid everywhere. I mean, it's probably not
Yeah.
liters, but I felt like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that was about 11 p.m. at night, and got up and just had a shower because I was drenched. I had a midwife friend who I'd met at uni that we were really close, been in each other's weddings and things, and she was going to come to the birth as a support for me and my husband. And so I called her as well, and she was obviously super excited. And the midwife had said, look, I'll just call the hospital, see what they want to do. Obviously, we're going to get you to come in and check to see that your waters have broken, or check out baby and everything, and then we'll just call them and see what they want to do, whether they want to then sit on me overnight if nothing happened, or I would go back home and then come back in the morning, or what. But she said she'd call me back with telling me who the doctor was on and what was happening. So then I hopped in the shower. She called back. It took maybe 45 minutes for her to call back, and in that time things became pretty regular, in that I was having tightenings at least every 2 to 3 minutes, not intense, but regular and consistent. So then, we made our way to the hospital, I think, by about midnight, so by an hour after. And I know it's only a 12-minute drive, and I remember that I had like 6 contractions in the car, and I was like, okay, so these are properly on top of each other.
Wow, that quick.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously it was early on, so I wasn't ridiculously uncomfortable in the car, but I was still, like sitting forward and not loving life. But yeah, but I mean, I guess I was excited because, when your waters break, you think, okay, there we go. Now the countdown's on to meet this baby. I don't have weeks left. This is hours, days. So that was, really exciting. Yeah, so we went into the hospital, and things just went from there. So I went to a room, and they popped the CTG monitor on initially just to check the baby. And I believe they would prefer you to be monitored with a breech birth, like with the CTG. And I was happy to do it, mostly because with him being breech, because his head was up higher, where they put the monitor on to monitor his heartbeat is a lot easier than when their babies are head down, and it's kind of that difficult angle where your belly then meets your pubic bone, and the monitors are really difficult. It was actually really easy for the monitors to stay on, and it was just the one band with the both monitors, so I was happy to do it. And so pretty quickly I was like standing next to the bed, couldn't sit on the bed because it was so uncomfortable. This was obviously still just meant to be an assessment, not like a proper labor room or anything. So went from there, and then after not even an hour of being in that room, I remember calling the bell and being like, "No, guys, this is fucked." Like, sorry to swear, but just being like, "This is next level. Actually, this is ramping up." And so they moved me into a labour room. So that was within an hour and a half of everything really kicking off. So
Wow. And so did you have any fear about, I guess, having a vaginal breech birth?
not in his labor, which still to this day, I feel like, I think almost now that I know him and love him just so much, you're like, oh, wow, was that risky, or is that, and I don't obviously regret it, but I feel like I have more fear thinking back about the birth now than I did almost at the time, even though, I will do his birth all over again. I absolutely loved it. But so I at the time didn't have fear, but I think it was also partly that the contractions were just on top of each other. I really didn't have, I went properly into labor land in his labor, and I don't, it's obviously that hazy memory for me. I've got a million photos that help tell the story, but I definitely don't have any memories of feeling fearful about the birth. I think because I was in a hospital where I worked, I knew the colleagues, I trusted them, I liked the doctor that was on call, I had a really good midwife who wasn't actually my midwife, but it was a midwife that was confident with breech birth. She'd seen it in the UK before. So I think I felt relieved enough by all the things, and obviously ecstatic that my body had started to do the process by itself. I think at that stage, if I'd ended up in a cesarean, like as in instantly on walking into the hospital before labour really kicked off, then I probably would have been pretty devastated. I don't think emotionally I had accepted a cesarean at that stage, especially not just with where my head, where my head was at with the hyperemesis and everything. I don't think I would have coped particularly well, but thankfully that was not the case. So yeah,
Yeah. So I'm just going back. You had the
yeah,
monitor on, and then things started to ramp up. And then how
yeah.
did your labor and birth unfold from there?
Yeah. So then we moved into the other labour room, which actually ended up being the high risk prem or twin room because it was the only one that was left. And I was like, oh, great, great. Thanks, guys. It's like this, yeah, the room that you know that all the complexities happen in. But anyway, didn't matter. It was fine. I had a shower. So yeah, I think I was on the bed initially only because they wanted to check me. So the doctor came in and checked me, I think about 1:30, and I was 2 centimeters dilated. And I was a bit heartbroken by that because I was like, this is really hard. And I'm 2 centimeters and they're not going to let me get an epidural. And clearly I have hours and hours and hours and hours and hours to go, and what is this? And obviously, if this had been a head down baby, I would not have gone to the hospital anywhere near that early. Like you would have stayed at home in your own environment. But anyway, my friend then came. Her name's Rachel. So yeah, Rachel came, and my husband was there, and we were like, okay, let's change it up. I'm not calling it quits at 2 centimeters when it's only been a couple of hours. I can pull myself together. So I guess that was my first sort of crisis of confidence, if you know that sort of thing with Rhea Dempsey. But yeah, so I
Yeah.
went into the shower and was pretty much just on my knees and then had my arms resting over a chair between Sam and Rachel, alternating, holding the shower head on my lower back. Yeah, for about 3 hours in the end. I think we just was just in there until 4:30 a.m. I just remember feeling like I just could not relax my body though. Like every time I'd have a contraction, I could feel my whole body just tense and clench. And I guess in my mind, I'm going, this is not what you want. Like you want everything to be as loose as you can be. Let your pelvic floor muscles relax and your baby descend. But I guess that was just not how I was able to be in that labor. But I mean, in the end, it didn't matter. Yeah, so about after 3 hours of being in the shower at that about 4:30 in the morning, I had thought I was losing my mind, and I was like, no, okay, that's it. I'm done, and I'll be getting my epidural now, please. Even though they had obviously encouraged me not to with a breech birth. But Rachel could see that I had, like, I don't know if you know, like a big purple line coming up the top of my bottom. So obviously pressing on those blood vessels that make it clear that it's a pretty good sign that you're fully dilated, or at least very close to. So she wasn't too concerned that I said, no, I've had enough. Like I'm going out into the main room and I'm going to try and figure something else out. Because yeah, I had briefly said to my midwife, like, oh, can I have an epidural? And she's like, absolutely not, pretty much. Like, she would have supported me if she knew that it was absolutely what I needed or wanted. But I think she knew that it wasn't in my best interest, and she, fully believed that I could keep coping. So yeah, went out into the bed and she checked me. Yeah, it must have been about 4:30, and she thought that I was fully dilated. But instead of being a nice like round bottom, it was his feet presenting. So she got the doctor to double check and see what was happening. And the doctor came in. So this was a reg. And so I don't know how much you know about the sort of hierarchy of doctors, but so they essentially are an obstetrician. They know what they're doing. They can be in the hospital essentially running the labour ward, but they're not a consultant, so the highest level. But so she came in and did an assessment, thought that I was probably 9, not quite 10 centimeters, but yes, definitely feet presenting. So then she called her consultant to come in.
Just quickly, is that called footling breech?
Well, isn't it? Isn't. So I guess because before labour he was what they would call a complete breech. So he was bottom first with his feet, like his knees were bent. They weren't flexing up by his head like
Oh, I see.
that's a
Yeah.
frank breech. A complete breech is when they just have their knees like bent and feet just near their bottom. And then
Yeah.
footling is completely feet first, whereas he was at the start of labour bottom first. So I guess it is like a version of footling, but they would still call it a complete breech because he dilated my cervix, or like went into labour with his bottom first. But I
Yeah.
guess I don't know where it comes to in the fact that then he did come feet first eventually in the end. I don't quite know whether that changes it to a footling or not, but that is definitely the terminology we'd use. So he had his little feet first. So she called the consultant to come on in because she didn't feel comfortable doing a breech birth, whereas the consultant had clearly said, oh, yep, sure, like if that's what Anna wants to do, like, oh, yeah, come in. So she came in, and by the time I think she got there, it must have been close to 5 a.m. or a bit after. I tried the gas to try and, because they didn't want me to push until, the consultant was in, despite my urges, which is, the easiest thing to just not push out your baby when your body's telling you to do it. But anyway, I tried my best. That thankfully, I guess it was probably good that I did have that sort of urge a little bit, because when the doctor came in, she must have assessed not long after 5, maybe 5:15 or something, and she said that by then I was definitely fully dilated, and that his bottom was really low in my pelvis, and his feet were really low, and his bottom was not far behind. So she was comfortable and happy to go ahead. I guess the other thing to say is that a breech labor usually is quicker than a cephalic labor or a head down. I'm not exactly sure why, but it's definitely what we see in practice, that it typically does occur quite hard and fast. And so I guess I then was reassured that my labor was mimicking what the doctors would have expected or hoped to see, because they had said, well, we want you to dilate at least 1 centimeter an hour, which for a head down baby and a first time mum, you'd say, just relax. Like,
Yeah.
that's a high expectation and absolutely not necessary, but they had put that pressure on me if possible. But yeah, I was obviously stoked that I'd essentially done 8 centimeters in 3 hours. So everything was rocketing along, and probably the reason why I felt like I couldn't relax, because it was quite intense.
Yeah.
And I guess if I'd known that, obviously I know that centimeters don't really matter and things can change super quickly. You're aware of that. But at the same time, when you get told you're 2 centimeters, you're kind of like, okay, well, it's probably going to be a lot longer. So yeah, if I had known that actually it wouldn't be that much longer, maybe I wouldn't have felt quite so helpless. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, the doctor came in. So the reg who'd done the initial assessment, she was questioning whether I needed to go into theatre and have an epidural so that she could safely deliver the breech. And I was a bit like, well, part of me was like, yes, I'll have the epidural, please, because I'm uncomfortable. But the other part of me was going, absolutely not. That's not, that doesn't seem necessary. And it feels like if you're going to interrupt my labor at this crucial point, surely that's going to do more harm than good in following physiology and getting this baby out. So thankfully the consultant thought that was a silly idea. And yeah, her words were just that she would prefer if I birthed on the bed, not necessarily any particular position, like she didn't mind that, but just she was pregnant herself and was like, if I need to do maneuvers for this baby, I can't get on the floor and do it. And I thought that was a fair compromise. So yeah, stayed on the bed. I initially tried being like all fours and like hanging over the bed, but that did nothing for me. I totally lost the urge to push and it felt really unnatural. So I laid on my side, and that's where I started to really get some good progress and could see. And yeah, it wasn't too long, maybe 20 minutes it took for me to get 1 foot out. And then after that, it was quite quick. It was actually really handy though, because when I could see his little foot, it's like that positive feedback of I could see his foot progressing as I pushed. So then I was like, oh, that's the right spot. I'm doing a good job. Like, it was like I didn't need a mirror. I had my own little foot hanging out to see. Then his second foot came out, and then they asked if they could do an episiotomy, because they thought if they need to do maneuvers to help him out, then they won't be able to do it later on. And at that stage, I consented. An episiotomy was something that I was obviously didn't want, but was fine with in the context of everything else. So they did do that. And yeah, so then it got to the point where his bottom came out, and then I got him out all the way up to like his armpits. And then this is something that I've actually been meaning to clarify with the doctor as to what the exact reason is why, but she then put her hands on and used what they call a love sets maneuver to get his arms and shoulders out, which I've been meaning to ask, was it because she saw a sign that she was concerned with his progress or the way he moved around or anything? Or because you'll see in a breech birth, the babies are really active in maneuvering that pelvis. So like even in the video I have, you can see him twisting and turning and arching and shrugging and doing all sorts that you can see he's clearly navigating my pelvis. And yeah, it's amazing. Babies, like they're such an active participant in birth, and yeah, it's really cool to see. So yeah, I've been meaning to ask her whether there was some reason why she put her hands on then it not, because typically it's hands off the breech. Yeah, which it's funny, my husband still uses that to this day. When my son touches something he shouldn't, he's like, hands off, you were breech. I'm like, that's not the same thing. That's not quite what the saying means. But anyway, we'll go with it. But yeah, it's funny. So yeah, they did the love sets maneuver, and by that stage, I think I must have been in stirrups, but I felt it much easier to push laying on my side and my back. So, which is totally in contradiction to what most other people want to do when they're birthing without pain relief, but that's obviously how my body needed to be. So yeah, got him out to that point. And then when it came to his head, I couldn't feel any contractions. And I'm not sure if that's partly because my uterus is pretty much empty, as in the head is clearly in my birth canal. There's pretty much nothing left in your uterus, I suppose, apart from obviously the placenta. But like, I'm not entirely sure why, but I definitely couldn't feel any contractions. And at that stage, his umbilical cord was getting quite tight, like at his belly button where it ties on, and they were getting a bit concerned. And at that stage, they also noticed that he had the cord around his neck 2 times, which obviously in like during pregnancy and in head down birth and everything, they're not at all concerned. In a way, it's actually a protective factor because it keeps the cord away from the shoulders being compressed when the uterus tightens. So it's a completely normal and fine thing most of the time. Obviously, it can get a bit tight at the end of birth for some babies, but most of the time that's not a complication. I think it's 1 in 3 babies have a cord around their neck. I did actually miss out that early in the labour, when they checked that I was 2 centimetres, the obstetrician did a scan to try and look and see if there was, we call it a nuchal cord, so a nuchal cord, but she couldn't see any. But I also don't think I let her scan particularly well because I was in labour. And this was the Tuesday or going into the early hours of the Wednesday. And on the Friday before that, I'd had the ECV, and clearly like they'd scanned and didn't think the cord was around his neck then. They thought it was near, but they didn't think it was around. I now, in hindsight, believe it was around, which is exactly why if they'd turned, got him halfway when he should have then sprung the rest of the way, I think it was around the whole time, and it tightened, and then he obviously got stuck. Yeah, because I
Yeah,
felt like
I totally agree. Like, even
yeah,
when you said earlier that I think you said something along the lines of you believe there's a reason why a baby is breech or something along those lines.
yes, yeah.
And I could not agree with you more. I've said it in previous episodes that I think if bub is breech, there's a reason for it.
Yes,
There's something, yeah.
absolutely. Because realistically, gravity should then move their head to be at the bottom of the pelvis because the head is the heaviest bit. So if that is not happening, then there's a reason for it. And I guess I was hoping that it was a simple reason, for example, his nuchal cord, as opposed to something like my pelvis was malformed, or there was. I guess another common reason is different variations of uteruses. So like when they've got what they call like a bicornuate uterus, so it's like got 2 horns, or if it has a septum in the uterus, or fibroids that make it harder for the baby to spin around. And I knew I didn't have any of those complications, but I guess, yeah, you just don't know. But now I believe it was his nuchal cord. Having said that, when he was birthing, he was twisting and turning so much. From when his feet came out, he definitely did like at least a 180-degree turn. And so I do wonder how much of the cord did he tie himself up in labour as well. So perhaps it was around once and then he tied it a second time just for a bit of fun. Um, so yeah, got to the point, I got him out, got up to his head was still inside, but I could not feel any contractions. And yeah, his umbilical cord attached to his belly was quite tight, and they'd noticed that it was around his head twice. So at that stage, they waited a good few minutes for me to get a contraction, and I didn't. And so then they didn't feel like where the positioning of the cord was, that they could just like pull his head out. It wasn't coming easily. So they did use forceps at that stage, completely consensually, like they asked. And the doctors were very calm, but I did sense that there was like, okay, no, they believe this is necessary. And so, yeah, they did use forceps to get his head out. Yeah. And so then when he came out, he was a bit flat, like didn't breathe instantly. But that's with all breech babies because they've had their umbilical cord exposed to the air before their head is birthed. So it obviously starts to constrict. So no matter whether they're born breech at cesarean, breech in a very fast birth, breech in a slow birth, almost all the time they need that extra minute or two to be really rubbed up and welcome to the world. So I wasn't shocked by that, yeah, regardless of how everything happened. And so, yeah, he did then go to the resus cot and they just, yeah, got him breathing. But yeah, again, like I said, I wasn't shocked by that. I expected that, and I'd explained that to my husband as well, that they likely do just need that bit more help to transition. So yeah, I guess on paper you could see that as a traumatic birth in that I had an episiotomy and forceps. But to me, the fact that it was a breech birth and that I got to labour and that I did it, and it was my first baby and people believed in me and supported me, and the fact that then my placenta came out and I had none of those pregnancy hormones and I didn't feel sick. I was on absolute cloud 9. So yeah, I was
Yeah.
stoked and still see his birth, yeah, really positively.
Well, to
Yeah.
me, a positive birth experience is where a woman is informed and in control of her choices. I
Yes,
think if you've got
absolutely.
those two things, then it's a positive birth experience most of the
Yes.
time. So, and it sounds like you had all of those things. So,
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Felt like I was heard and had options at every stage. And I never felt like, when the doctors were requesting an episiotomy or to birth on the bed or to have the forceps, none of that felt pressured. It all felt like these are the options. This is what we would prefer. And had he been a head down baby, I probably would have been a lot more pushed against a lot of things, but it was different, and they were things that I guess obviously felt right at the time. And yeah, when he came out, I just knew he was fine. That was like a complete gut instinct that I was like, nah, he's fine. He just needs a minute to transition. Otherwise it can be a bit scary to see your baby a bit limp and not breathing, but he picked up really quickly with their help. And we take once they've cut the cord, they can take some gases from the cord, like some blood, and then run it on a gas machine, and all of that showed that he wasn't particularly stressed or anything. So it really was just that last few minutes or seconds of birth that caused that. Yeah, so he did end
Wow.
up
So how are
going.
you feeling in that moment?
Thankful that it was like, definitely thankful that it had happened and that it went well. Yeah, I was really obviously very proud of myself for doing it without pain relief too. I guess that's something that in my job, women can do it without pain relief, but you just see so many people get epidurals. Like, it's definitely the majority. And so I guess that's constantly watching people reach what they perceive to be their pain threshold at the time and feeling like, oh wow, is this actually possible? Despite knowing that for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, women have been able to do this without pain relief and using different coping mechanisms. So obviously knowing that they are available, but yeah, I guess it's different when you see it, or even just the story of birth in the media and on telly. It's, yeah, definitely not perceived the way that I think it could be. That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And so you mentioned briefly too the birth of your placenta. So do you want to walk us through that? How was the birth of the placenta and did you do anything special with it?
Yeah, I had the injection to get my placenta out. I requested, the hospital I work at does a medicine called symptometrin that's got oxytocin or syntocin on the synthetic version and ergometrin in, and that often makes people feel sick. So I opted just for the oxytocin version. I said I'm not having anything else that's going to make me feel sick because I vomited even in his labor, so I was not having any more
You're
of that.
done with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted the placenta out at that point. I was like, I'm so done with it. And I guess knowing that I was in hospital and had disrupted physiology in that way of being in hospital and whatever, I was happy to have that injection, and it came out pretty quickly. Blood loss was fine. And then the placenta, I initially had thought maybe we'd keep it, but then if we were to plant it, I was worried the dogs would dig it up. And I
Oh
was
no.
certainly, yeah, you hear a lot of that happening at works. And I certainly was not going to be consuming it, considering I believe the hormones that was making is what was making me so sick for so long. There was no way I was risking putting that back in my body in any form personally. So, obviously everyone makes their own choices, but for me, that was just not something I was interested in. I was like obviously very grateful that placenta helped me grow a healthy baby, but I was quite happy for it to go away.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, I
Totally fair
didn't.
enough.
I didn't do any. I didn't probably give the placenta the respect it deserves, but yeah, I was happy to say bye bye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how was your physical recovery after the birth, and was there anything that helped with the healing process?
So with his birth, with the episiotomy, it did extend to a 3A tear with the forceps that they did at the end. Obviously, they were not particularly concerned about my perineum at that stage. They were more concerned with getting my baby out safely, which my doctor then did obviously apologise for. Not that it's necessarily her fault, but she did apologise that it happened and explained how it was entirely just out of concern for the baby, and things happened. It was so a 3A, so it's less than 50% of the sphincter muscle was interrupted, I guess. So I still had most of it, and they sutured it back together in the room. And I believe that the episiotomy aspect of that is what was more painful. Thankfully, I had no issues with continence and got straight onto a pelvic floor physio once I was at home from, about 6 weeks, was straight onto all of that. But yeah, I believe the episiotomy was the really painful part. That's certainly where, like, if I was to pinpoint on my body, it was along the episiotomy line that was the difficult thing. And certainly comparing it to my future birth, it was, that was pretty uncomfy. Lots of ice packs and ibuprofen. But otherwise, my milk came in like before 48 hours. Just,
Wow.
it was
That's
full on.
quick.
Yeah, so
Mm.
it kind of felt like everything my body did was in extremes, like got pregnant very quickly, was pregnant, got hyperemesis, and like took all of the pregnancy hormones. Labor just did it very quickly, like, and then it felt like your milk, you can have all of the milk. It felt like my body was like, I'll take this challenge and I'll I'll run with it. So yeah, I was very lucky with a very, very good milk supply, which I did end up then getting mastitis or sort of blocked ducts and getting that hot and uncomfortable feeling on my breasts quite a lot through breastfeeding him. And I have noticed that I'm very sensitive. So like I have to be careful with different bras that I wear and where they put pressure. Like I'm very quick to develop, block ducts or mastitis type symptoms. So that had been a challenge definitely in his feeding journey. But otherwise it was, definitely a pretty smooth one. I never had pain feeding him. I almost feel like guilty to say that because I don't think that's very common at all. But it was,
It's great to hear, though.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess I had the privilege of when I did latch him, I guess I knew what I was doing more than many people on that first latch. But that doesn't mean that it goes well for all people, even with knowledge. Different babies have different mouths, different breast shapes, and yeah, all sorts, different everything for everyone. So,
Yeah. It's
yeah.
probably a great bonus for you too, especially with the tricky pregnancy and then a very quick labor. It's probably a nice surprise, perhaps.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I definitely felt like I'd done my difficult part with that pregnancy, and unfortunately, that was the longest part of all of it. Like, not that I would wish to have
Yeah.
any of it be difficult for me or anyone, but you're
Mm.
like, oh, of course, the challenge I have is the 9 month long challenge. But I did have the blessing of getting to 37, and so he was born at 37 and 4 in the end, the early hours of that Wednesday. So I did luckily, like, I got enough to be term and know that I had to have a baby that was more than ready to come, but then not have to hang on to him for another 5 weeks because that would not have been pleasant whatsoever. So yeah, take the little wins where
Yeah.
you get them, I guess.
Yeah, totally. And how was your overall postpartum experience?
Yeah, so positive. Just to not feel sick.
Oh,
I was on
great.
top of the world.
Yeah.
I had this complete love bubble with him. I felt all of the complete birth high of being so proud of myself for the birth we'd achieved together and trusting my body and trusting my instincts. And yeah, his postpartum was really amazing. I think I honestly had like a high for 5 months. It was great. And he
That's
slept,
so
yeah,
nice.
and he slept well initially, not for long, but for the first 5 or 6 months, he slept pretty well. So then was on top of the world, I think.
Yeah, nice. And then when it came time to conceiving your second baby, did you
Mm.
do anything differently to prepare to conceive?
I
Not that,
didn't,
I mean, I know the first time was a bit of a surprise, but
yeah, yeah. I guess any time from when he was about 15 months, so that then there would be that 2 year age gap, we were happy to have a baby, but he was still feeding a lot overnight. So I did eventually night wean him at 16 months. And then that I got my cycle back by 18 months because I wasn't having a period at that stage. And I did night wean him partly because the nights were so challenging and it'd been a lot of months of not having good sleep. But then it was also, I was keen to get my cycle back for if we wanted another baby soonish. And then again, I got that one period and then I was pregnant again. So, which is a bit
wow.
dramatic. So, yeah, I definitely know to be very careful. Clearly,
Yeah.
we are quite fertile. So, yeah, very
Oh,
lucky, but
nice.
almost a bit scary.
Yeah.
Two for two.
And and then physically and emotionally throughout the pregnancy, you mentioned or you alluded to earlier that you had HG throughout this
Mm,
pregnancy as well. So
yes.
was the experience any different for you? Did you find anything else that worked for you to help with your symptoms? Yeah, what
Mm.
was that like?
This one was even harder, to be honest. It was 4 weeks and one day that I was vomiting and feeling sick, which is like literally when you test positive on a test and it's like already there. I think I had like 4 days. I think I tested like just that bit earlier and I was pregnant. I had like 4 days of being excited. And then, you know what? It was really confronting. I was like, what have I done? It took me straight back to, so I would say that I got depressed by the end of Tom's pregnancy and I felt like as soon as I felt sick in Holly's pregnancy, the level of depression I got to by being 37 weeks with him, right back there straight away at 4 weeks. I didn't have that build up of it's, and I knew it wasn't going to end. I mean, obviously, you hope that this pregnancy would be different, but I had no hope that it would not stick around to the end. So, yeah, that was definitely a lot. And I was in those early weeks, I had a really early dating scan, like not, I think 6 weeks just on the day, which you definitely recommend doing it closer to 8 weeks. But I needed to know that this baby was in my uterus and hopefully have a heartbeat because I was thinking if this is an ectopic pregnancy or something, not going well, then I need to know about it and be able to, deal with this right now because I can't spend another minute feeling sick if I'm not getting a baby at the end of this. And then even having those fleeting thoughts of terminating that pregnancy purely based on how unwell I felt, which was so confronting because this is a baby that we wanted, that we tried for, that obviously you fall in love with the idea and that baby as soon as you know they exist or even before really. So that was extremely confronting. You just don't think your mind will go that way. But yeah, so that was a challenge. And then I tried a few different medications in her pregnancy that I wasn't able to try in my son's, purely because I'd been on call with the group practice program that I was working in with Tom's pregnancy. So these were drugs that are sort of a bit sedative at night but have a nausea relieving effect during the day, but they did nothing. So yeah, tried those. I had definitely hopes that they would work. And I'd say it was hard in the fact that I had a toddler to look after and who I felt like I was constantly letting down. You know, his needs are technically met, he's fed, he's clean, he's loved, but I'm not the mum that I was before. The food is not the quality of food that we were giving him before. And then the knowing that your husband is working full time, then coming home doing everything for the toddler, essentially being a single parent, you know, which people don't generally sign up for. And he took it all on like a champ and carried it for the team, but as I carried the baby. But yeah, it was really tricky for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. But thankfully she stayed head down. So
Yeah.
one less challenge.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that leads into what was your model of care and how did your perception of childbirth evolve?
Yeah, so I very much knew that I was capable of birthing a baby by this point. I felt, you know, like, wow, my body did it. Of course, I can do it again. I had wondered about a home birth with my son, but obviously, once he turned breech, I was not willing to I wouldn't have been eligible for a home birth in that program. It was too late to be booking in with private midwives, and it's probably not something I would have risked knowingly at home. If it accidentally happened that your baby was breech and you didn't know about it, I could probably roll with it, but I don't think I could have planned a breech birth at home at that stage. So yeah, he's obviously ruled out quickly, but in this I used the same midwifery program. My midwife I had actually retired in between the pregnancies, so I chose a different midwife, another one who I had worked with, who was actually my partner when I was working in the MGP program, so someone I trusted. And yep, so chose her and was, yes, definitely thinking about a home birth this time around, especially knowing that my son's labour, I think the active labour was 4 hours, you know, like it really
Mm.
wasn't long from things starting to him being born. It was not even 7 hours from that very first sign of labour to him being out, you know. So definitely was thinking it may actually be safer to have a home birth above all else, because I'm not having a baby in the car, I'm not having a baby in emergency. I don't want to have a baby within 5 seconds of walking into the birth suites. You want to be able to ground yourself and feel comfortable in your environment. I don't want the whole labour to be a rush. So it genuinely felt, yeah, safer and a better idea to have a baby at home. And my husband was certainly more on board with it this time. He was on board with it for the first one, but he had a lot of questions, and he was definitely happy to do it the second time round, knowing that my labour was straightforward, I guess. And I mean, it's kudos to him really, because my son did need resus. So, and I did have forceps. So there were interventions that were deemed medically necessary at the time. And the fact that he was still happy to go ahead, yeah, was great. But I guess he was there for most of the midwife appointments, and he was able to ask the questions he needed to ask. Yeah, so, and
And it sounds like he
obviously,
had a deep trust in you as well.
yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, did you do anything differently to prepare for birth this time around? You mentioned a hypnobirthing course last time. Yeah,
Mm.
talk about
I
that.
didn't really do any hypnobirthing this time. I read some more books. Can't remember which. Oh, in the I don't think I was pregnant when I read Rachel Reed's
Oh,
the
oh
book with
no, I've forgotten
the
it.
red book
Yeah,
with
yeah,
the
yeah. Oh
something
my
about childbirth
gosh,
as a
it's
rite of
literally
passage.
yes, reclaiming.
Reclaiming childbirth. Yes, I
Yes.
had read that in
Oh
the
my
meantime.
gosh, it's
Yeah.
like literally sitting on my shelf behind
Yeah,
me.
I know
Yeah.
that'd be in my house too. I've got, yeah. But anyway, definitely read that one at some point. I think, yeah. Anyway, I was pretty grounded in my beliefs about birth, and so that wasn't really a concern for me. I guess the main thing was just that we prepped the birth space in a way. So I had the 3A tear with Tom, so I was more keen for the midwives to be able to be quite hands-on with my birth if need be, in that, like, if they thought I needed an episiotomy, if it looked like it was going to go again, or be able to apply warm compresses or help me by seeing things more clearly and helping me to really breathe out my baby. I was keen, even though I know that being in a bath can help soften the perineal tissue and can reduce tearing in that way. I think I was just more keen to have the close midwife supervision and guidance. So I didn't hire a birth pool, but yeah, we did obviously get lots of towels. Got lots of towels from the op shop, and it was in winter, so we have a fire combustion heater, and we have like a fire gate around, obviously with the toddler, and we had all the towels over the fire gate and everything for a few weeks. So they're always toasty and warm. Yeah, it was just preparing things like that for the house, really. I think, yeah, we're pretty happy. We told some family we were having a home birth, but not all. In the end, it turned out that we probably could have done it the other way. The family that we didn't tell probably were probably more supportive in the end than the family we did tell. But
It's so tricky telling
yeah,
people, isn't it, and making that call because
yes,
you just you need to protect your own space and not process other
mm-hmm.
people's fear for
Yep,
them because then it plays into
absolutely.
yeah, it's
Yep. And
tricky.
especially being in my position going, but technically compared to me, to them, I'm the expert. I say that in quotations, no one's really the expert. The woman is. But, I'm going, I do know a lot about birth and pregnancy, and I would like you to have some faith in me. And that I deeply love my children and I would not be risking something that I find dangerous. And honestly, if you look at the statistics, it is safer for a multiparous woman, like having a second baby, to have it at home. That's what the statistics say, that if she's low risk, that's safer. So really, I was
Yeah.
doing the safest option. And I guess it always comes down to, not only was I physically well, but that would help me be more mentally well. And given that I was in such a low space in her pregnancy, that was really quite a deep depression in hers by the end, which was really tricky. I was like, I don't need more trauma on top of that, I guess. Yeah.
And just on that too, I really hope there becomes more services available around HG or some more research about, what causes it and things that can be done to help because
Mm,
I'm hearing this again and again from women that do experience HG, how debilitating it is physically and
yeah.
emotionally, and the deep depression that women often go into when they experience these really horrific symptoms. Yeah, it's
I mean, literally, like I explain it, like imagine when you have gastro and you feel sick and you have it, I don't know, and you spend 2 or 3 days on the couch and you're essentially a blob to the world, like you can't do anything, you just feel so horrible. It's literally like that constant nausea, feeling sick, and it zaps all your energy and motivation, and you just like that for 9 months. Like gastro is hell when you have it for 2 days, let alone when it's just consistent. And for me, the vomiting was inconvenient. It meant that I was dehydrated some of the time. I'd have to go and get IV fluids at the hospital, but at the end of the day, it was the nausea that took it from me. It was the unrelenting, like you wake up to it in the middle of the night, it's there. It was there 24/7 every day for that whole pregnancy for both of them. And that's just this next level. Like, if I didn't know that I was getting a beautiful baby at the end of it, I guess that was the one benefit of my second pregnancy, was that I was like, I can do the baby thing. I know that I love babies, that felt natural to me, that I've really enjoyed having my son. We don't spend nearly any time apart now. It's only when I go to work. I know that that's something that I love. And so I had that knowledge that it will pass and it will be worth it. But yeah, to feel like I was such a crap parent and yeah, colleague and friend and partner and everything, yeah, it's a lot. It's really
yeah.
tricky.
So then coming
Mm.
back towards the end of your pregnancy, how were you feeling towards the end and what were the initial signs of labor?
Yeah, so I had a lot of Braxton Hicks throughout both their pregnancies, actually, but definitely a lot throughout Holly's. And when I was still working, I think I finished work at 34 weeks, but when I kept working, we have like the little bedside ultrasound machines. And so I checked every single shift that her head was still down, because it's definitely how it felt. But I was like, are you still down? Is your head still down?
Yeah.
So yeah, was definitely checked a lot about that. But once I was confident that she was head down, and again, I had a reason. I felt that Tom was breech being the cord, so I wasn't concerned that it was a my body factor. I was, yeah, definitely
Mm.
more confident about that. I then had a lot of, like, I wouldn't even call it false labor starts, but you'd get really consistent and uncomfortable contractions. There was a day at 36 weeks I remember spending in the bath because I was trying to turn off the contractions, because I was like, not yet, not yet. We just got to get to 37 weeks to have this baby at home. And they obviously didn't go anywhere, but they took the toll. And knowing that I had a 37 weeker the first time, obviously my expectation was hopefully not to go to 42 weeks, which thankfully I didn't. But yeah, she had a lot of nights, and it felt like a lot of things triggered it. So going for a walk triggered it, and then like having intercourse triggered it. Doing anything would just trigger these runs of contractions, which were things that then you would think, oh, I'll do that to try and encourage labor because I'm feeling so awful and I'm ready for this baby to be born. And obviously, I'm aware that babies take as long as they need, and we do believe that they help initiate labor. So obviously, I want my baby to tell me when they're ready and initiate labor. But at the same time, Tom came out at 37 weeks and he was fine. So can I just can you just get out now? Um, so I guess I felt overdue right from being 37 weeks and 4 days. I was like, all right, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm done feeling sick. I'm ready to meet my baby. But yeah, did manage to hold in there. And so she was born on a Tuesday in the end. And I know from like that Saturday, we went for a walk and had people over that night, and I was really uncomfortable. And things sort of changed from then. So that night, when I would have the runs of contractions, I think I tried to go to bed, but I couldn't. We ended up watching the whole series of Muster Dogs on the telly, which is just like, those just comforting, lovely things to watch that, are just easy and not distressing in any way. So we just watched
Yeah.
that whole thing, which I'd never watched before, but watched from start to finish. But eventually I fell asleep on the couch. And so obviously it all petered out. But from that point, any Braxton Hicks or tightening that I had became painful, like to the level that not really painful, but enough to really stop you in your tracks, make you breathe through it a bit. They never backed down from that intensity from that point. I know on the Sunday morning, I definitely thought, okay, like after I'd woken up again, I thought things became regular again to the point that I actually put my TENS on purely because I thought I didn't use a TENS in my son's labor, I should say. My husband did suggest that fully dilated when I was like, I can't do this anymore, that I could try the TENS. I was like, I think it's probably a bit late, babe.
Yeah.
But this pregnancy, I thought, no, you're meant to put it on earlier. The earlier you put it on, the better it works.
Yeah.
Is what a lot of women report anyway. So I put it on thinking, well, if this is going to be the start, we'll get it on so I can get good use out of it. They were definitely like every 5 minutes, but then again, things petered out. I then had a midwife come over that afternoon, so the Sunday afternoon, and so I was 38 and a bit weeks at that point. And that midwife herself had also had hyperemesis. So she was aware of how I was feeling and how intense it was. And she offered me a stretch and sweep, which initially was not planning on taking. And I was even second guessing right up until the point, and which I did opt to have. And she said I was an easy, like 3 centimeters, super soft and stretchy. I honestly didn't feel it. Like I barely felt the examination, which I guess is because my cervix was so favorable. It's not like you're trying to manually open a cervix that's not open. So it honestly didn't hurt me at all. I wouldn't say that I actively regret having that stretch and sweep, but I don't think I would do it again. I don't think that it was an intervention that needed to happen. I don't think it particularly sped anything up. And I don't think that I didn't want to speed up things. Obviously, I was sick of pregnancy, sick of feeling so sick, but I was obviously well aware of physiology and wanting to let my body and baby do their thing. So, but I guess it was also nice to have that conversation and meeting with a midwife and someone, a colleague and a friend who could really empathize. So yeah, saw her that afternoon and had a really lovely full night's sleep that night. And I was a little bit gutted in that I was like, I thought labor was like just on the brink, but I guess you can't complain about a really good sleep, especially when there's things to come.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Monday my husband decided to just start his maternity leave or paternity leave essentially. I mean, I guess if I had stayed pregnant for longer, he would have gone back. But yeah, he decided not to go in that Monday. Monday was my one childcare day, so we dropped my son off, and I saw the chiropractor again in his pregnancy because I definitely felt like she was giving me good. She's also a doula and had done spinning babies courses and things. So I felt really like she helped out a lot in my son's birth, in that I thought, look, if I'm going to have a breech baby, I felt like she'd help maximize the flexibility and mobility of my pelvis and how to help align things the best you possibly could, that let me feel really confident going into his birth. So I thought, look, why not do it again this birth, check that everything's really, lined up and got the most mobility and everything that it can in the right spots. So yeah, saw her and she was pretty happy with everything. I've been doing stretches for a couple of weeks at that point. So saw her. And then a lot of colleagues at work, well, a lot, I mean, I think 3 of them have gone to this place in a shopping centre near us that do massages. And 3 people, I think, have broken their waters within like 24 hours of getting a massage at this place. Or might even be less than that. Might have been like all the same day they broke their
Wow.
waters. And I was like, I'm onto this. Let me give it a go. I'll see. Like I could go. It was literally just a head and shoulders massage. I thought, what could go wrong if it doesn't send me into labor? I'd love a massage. So we went there and I did that. And then we went and got something from Bunnings. And I just remember like I just kept having these tightenings and they were so intense that like we're just trying to walk to Bunnings. And I took so long because they were just they'd really like, they'd last a good minute. They'd stop me in my track. But yeah, nothing ended up happening of that day. So we went to bed. But then I woke up by, I reckon, about 11 p.m. that night. and things. Like I remember just laying in bed, just kept making like a low groan sound through them because they were becoming more intense. And I was going, I'm not getting up and putting on this TENS machine again, only to take it off. So I definitely waited a bit longer this time, but then yeah, ended up getting out of bed. I don't know exactly what time. I'm guessing maybe 1 a.m. ish. And we, yeah, put something on the telly. I think we ended up putting on Harry Potter, which is purely because we've watched it so many times. I wouldn't say I'm a hardcore fan or anything, but it's something familiar. And we
Yeah.
watched all of Muster Dogs day before, so it needed to be something new. Yeah, so put that on, and I remember like really leaning into my dog. One of my dogs, he's like a big 40 kilo Ridgeback Greyhound dog, and just really like he's so placid, but I just grab his fur and like scrunch it and put my head into him, and he just wouldn't even flinch. He didn't care, but I felt really that was one of the beauties, I guess, of having a labour at home. And yeah, really just leaning into him as a comfort. Had the TENS on, I put on eventually, and I had a birth comb as well this time. I don't think they were really a thing with my son, not that I knew about anyway, not that I'd ever seen anyone bring into work. So yeah, did that. So Rachel came to this birth as well. We called her, I think maybe 3 a.m. She came, or 3:30. She came over, and not long after that, it got to the point where I thought, okay, these contractions are regular and intense enough that if my son woke up, I would want my husband to be with me. So therefore, I also plan to have my sister in the birth space. We're quite close, and I mean, a part of me wanted to inspire her in that, like, hopefully, I could have a straightforward birth and she could see how powerful the human body or females' bodies are. In the end, she did, and she was glad she was there. But I don't think you can turn everyone into a birth nerd. Some people just don't like blood and guts. So she was she was fine, but she's like, yeah, but you did scream and there was blood, and I was like, but wasn't it beautiful? And she's like, I guess. I mean, she was great. She was there for my son,
Yeah.
but I was like, okay, I guess you can't make everyone love birth the way I do, but she definitely does take away, the power of a human. Anyway, so she came over as well because I was like, I need her to be around for my son. I wanted him there in that I didn't need him to be like present during my labor, but I didn't want him to leave the house necessarily. I wanted access to him because we're always together, pretty inseparable. And I knew he needed his individual support person. So if something was going on, he could be taken wherever. Or I guess in the occurrence that I needed to go to hospital, obviously he instantly had someone to look after him. So she came over and things felt like they were definitely ramping up. But then I think about 5:30 a.m. I just fell asleep on the couch. And we all of us fell asleep until about I think 6:30. And I was just then I had that big cry of, are you kidding me? Everyone came over. I thought this was the real deal. Like, obviously, I didn't think it was really intense, super, super intense, but I definitely thought things were regular and uncomfortable and definitely thought we were on. And I did at this point do a little bit of a self examination and I felt, oh no, not quite at that point, I don't think. Oh no, I had, and I felt like I could definitely feel there was bulging membranes and cervix. So I obviously knew I wasn't fully dilated. My body wasn't telling me that, but I thought that I made a little bit of change, but didn't think it was that much. Again, I'm fully well aware that what your cervix is doing doesn't mean that much, but when you are desperate to be in labor, sometimes you're curious.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, did check, but didn't, yeah. And so then my friend Rachel, obviously being a midwife, then offered to do an exam and to see what was happening. Because at that point I was thinking, is this baby posterior? Are they like brow presentation or something that's making them difficult for things to kickstart properly? And she sort of had a feel of my belly, did an exam, thought that I was a good 5 to 6 centimeters, thought that the baby was LOA, so a really good position for birth, usually. But those things all filled me with comfort. I felt like, okay, no, my body has made change. I wasn't, incorrect in thinking that I was in labor. And I obviously, not that, babies can be born in all sorts of positions and they're obviously active and mobile during labor. Proof from my son's birth with how much I could visually see him move. But yeah, definitely felt comforted by the fact that information. And she did do a bit of the stretch and sweep at that point too, which really everything kickstarted well and truly off again. At this stage, the sun had rose. I think this was about 7:30 in the morning, and we did end up going into the kitchen, which is all a big open plan area, but the kitchen has like a lot of natural light, and I was a bit nervous to go there and think that would turn off any labor, but I was also curious to see what the day ahead was going to be like. And we had some brekkie, and yeah, things definitely kicked off. And then not long after that, I just kept repeating, like with every contraction, like, I don't like this, which is not like it's something that I repeated constantly in my son's labor as well. And so Sam and Rachel sort of looked at each other like, okay, I think we're on this time, like now. And it's not even that it's like my body just needs to completely repeat the same thing. And obviously my body, I've just gone to, I don't like this, even though, I'm positive that it's labor and it's a good
Yeah.
thing. But yeah, that was just my little thing that I consistently said over and over and over and over again. But yeah, they knew that it was a good sign. And so I did message my midwife. Again, my primary midwife was off, but the midwife had come over on the I think she had COVID actually, unfortunately. She was sick. But the midwife that had come over on the Sunday, she came over, she was on call and she, yeah, could come. So she decided to come over, I think by about 8:30, 9 o'clock she got there, and the second midwife came not long after. She did, yeah, a set of obs and had a listen to bubs and was pretty happy. And yeah, definitely, I think once she arrived, everything really ramped up. And I wonder if that's the midwife in me, that pedantic thought of if anything goes wrong, I'm the midwife and I'm the one that's made the decision. And I not talked my husband into it, but I'm the one that's in charge here. And I think knowing that the other midwives were there and I could turn my brain off completely was a real relief and definitely enabled labour to actually kickstart itself properly.
Yeah.
So yeah, then things got, yeah, much more intense in a good way. Yeah.
Yeah. And so your midwife arrived, and then how did the birth unfold from there?
Yeah. Well, so the second midwife that came is someone that was a little bit more, definitely a bit more senior than me. So I definitely really liked that. I felt comforted by her presence. The other main midwife that came, love her to bits, but I think we graduated. I think she graduated after me. And even though that means nothing, because I think she's a brilliant midwife, I had in the back of my brain that I was like, technically been a midwife longer than you. Will you know everything? Which is ridiculous because one, midwives will never know anything. And two, I completely trust her as a colleague. And I was thrilled to have her there because I do trust her, but it was just one of those little niggly things. So I was stoked to have the second midwife as well. And so, yeah, just was plodding along doing my thing. I definitely could feel a little bit of pressure, but I didn't. I think I verbalized it, but I didn't think that I was fully dilated because I wasn't feeling that in my body. But I think she must have thought that I meant, oh, I think the baby's coming soon. But I think it was just the bulging membranes, lack of fluid that I was feeling. I think by about 11, I really was quite uncomfortable. And I think I was sick of it. I think I was hitting a transitional sort of point there. And in my mind, I was like, I just want my waters to break because then I know things will just be on. And I was really getting like a bit fed up about it. And then not long after that, my midwife did come over and say, do you think, because she hadn't checked me at all at that stage. And she said, do you think we should check you and see where you're at and potentially break your waters? And I think just being in labor land, like being in my head, I did agree to that. And again, I'm not sure if it's something I would do again, but it's something that we did do. So yeah, she did check me and she says I was a good at least 8 centimeters, maybe a bit more. And she did end up breaking my waters at that point. Lots of clear fluid. And then things were really on. That was like gone from me just vocalizing to being a bit screamy because it was
Yeah.
just, I guess, that intensity of the head hitting your cervix, not that nice cushiony balloon of fluid, and definitely ramped up that pressure urge. So yeah, I'm not sure if I would have done that again. I think my midwife was also seeing how over it I was from the days of things stopping and starting and stopping and starting and the months and months of feeling so unwell. And I think she knew that I was just a bit fed up and I didn't have a lot of stamina left in me, I think, by the end of that pregnancy. So I think she knew that that's possibly what I needed, even though especially in my non-pregnant state, I think, oh, I could have just held out a bit longer. I didn't need to do that. But I do think that was certainly consensual, and I definitely didn't feel
Yeah.
pressured into it. But yeah, that's where I was at the time. So things definitely, yeah, ramped up from there. And it's interesting, I kept trying to lay down after that, and everyone kept encouraging me to stand upright and let gravity help. And I was like, I just want to have a lay down. I also think it's what my body needs to do. And they were like, no, up you get, up you get. And so I did get up and I sort of walked over next to the fireplace and sort of squatted and tried to push, like bear down a little bit. I had, again, done a little bit of an internal exam and could feel that my baby's head was like right there. And they said that when I did bear down and not scream quite so much, then there was a bit of head on view. Like clearly I was very close to having this baby, but I just was, yeah, not coping particularly well. And I kept saying, like, can you just call an ambulance to drop off a green whistle? Like, I don't need them to take me to the hospital. I don't need them to do anything. I just need a bit of pain relief. So can they just drop off a green whistle? Which I don't even think is something that they I mean, they definitely wouldn't come and just do a green whistle drop off. I don't even know if they give it to women in labor, but yeah, I was just, that was the ouch my brain could see.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, they obviously wouldn't do that, especially because they could see that my baby was close. They had a listen in with the Doppler again. Obviously, they'd done this multiple times in the labor, but they listened in again, and her heart rate was just that little bit lower. And it was almost the spur on that I needed. And I sort of freaked out a little bit, thinking, oh my gosh, we're at home and her heart rate's dropped. I mean, it dropped only just below normal. It wasn't a significant drop at all. Also, something very common that happens when your baby is about to be born. And I did know
Yeah.
that, but it's almost like I needed to hear that. And then the second midwife sort of came over and she said, Anna, this is physiological for babies. You know that it's normal, but you also know that you're fully dilated and that you need to birth this baby and that you can do it and that you're strong and you've got this. And I just sort of needed her to come over, and it was like, okay, come on, put on your big girl pants. You can do this. Like, you know that your baby's okay. Don't panic about that. But let's actually get on and have this baby in a really supportive way. And so then they obviously listened again afterwards, and her heart rate was perfectly fine. So that reassured me enough. But then that second midwife did suggest that I go into the shower. And because she could see that I was just really losing the plot a bit, and I went in the shower and I threw myself down. I laid down. And the second I laid down, the urge to push was so strong. It was that fetal ejection reflex. My baby came out. Within 2 or 3 contractions, her head was birthed. And I do have a little live photo of that. And I'm literally saying, like, oh, I'm so proud of myself when her head's out. And they're like, your baby's not born yet, Anna. Like, just wait till your baby, like, yes, you did amazing, but wait till your baby's out. But in my mind, I was like, yeah, but they can pull the baby out from now. Like, obviously, I will give a push, but at the end of the day, I was like, I've done the hard bit. The hard bit's the head. The rest should just come out. Um, but yeah, I did, get her head out quite quickly. And so I didn't know the genders of either of my babies, which was quite impressive in my son's birth, given that his testicles were in the world for a good amount of time before he was born. No one told me. I still got to see that one. But yeah, so I didn't know her gender either. But yeah, so her head came out, and then so in the shower they were able to use some of the warm water to help soften everything up. And then they did, got Bubs out. And then I sort of pulled her out once they got her shoulders out and pulled her up onto me. And I didn't even just put her onto me. I looked straight away. I was like, this is a girl. I need to know. I sort of had this feeling after my son's pregnancy. Like, I had a feeling that whole pregnancy that he was definitely a boy. And then in my daughter's, I was like, no, I'm completely certain this is a girl and she will be a home birth. And I knew that before I got pregnant with her. So, I mean, women
Wow.
always have predictions at work. I didn't trust my own predictions because you watch people not get it right all the time, but that was such a strong feeling for me. And yeah, there was a lot of intuition throughout both their pregnancies, actually, which I didn't really expect. But yes, I pulled her up and saw that she was a girl and thought, yeah, I was right. And pulled her straight onto me. She didn't cry instantly, but cried very quickly with a rub up of a towel. I could tell she had good tone. Her color was good. I wasn't concerned. Yeah, so she was born and it was amazing. Yeah. And
Wow. And so how are you feeling
yeah.
in that moment then?
Oh, ecstatic. Yep. In both of their births, I remember feeling this moment of, okay, like, it's up to me and I just have to do this thing. I have to, you have to do hard things. Like, I have to do this now. It's up to me. I have to birth this baby. And I knew that at that point, I guess, when I was by the fire and I knew that her head was just like, you could just see it, thinking, okay, it's far too late for them to get an ambulance for me to go to hospital and them to pull this baby out or have a cesarean. Not that obviously I wanted that, but I knew, okay, it's too late. This is a point that I now know it's up to me. And so I think then achieving that is what also felt so amazing in her birth, being like, I can do hard things. And I think that's, been something that's really stuck with me even since her birth. Yeah, she's 15 months old now, but whenever there are hard things, I'm like, nope, I can do it because, I can do hard things because I have before, you just show up and you have to do it. But yeah,
Totally. I love
yeah,
that.
was stoked.
And how was your physical recovery after the birth, especially with the oh, actually, did you have any tearing?
Yes, so I had a second degree tear with her, but it was quite small. But that compared to the episiotomy and the 3A last time, it was nothing. Like, it honestly, a little bit of ice and maybe a bit of Panadol, and didn't even think about it. It healed really quickly. Yeah, it's interesting. I guess in social circles, non-work related ones, you have a lot of people say, like, oh, I'd have a cesarean because I wouldn't ever want to risk tearing or, having everything be destroyed like that. And I just think I'm so quick to pipe up and say, I had significant tear and an episiotomy with my first baby, and I had a small second with my second. And I can tell you from both of them, the recoveries are different. I wouldn't ever have an episiotomy again unless it was really necessary because that really hurt. But at the same time, I'm a whole woman at the end of the day. My body is recovered. You can still have good sex. Your body is not broken. It's totally built for this.
Yes.
And yeah, it's something that really bothers me when people say they'd have a cesarean purely just to avoid that, because I feel like, do you think then that I'm less of a human because I've had perineal trauma? Because I don't feel like I'm less of a woman in any way because of that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, but definitely the contrast is really stark to me, that the way that I obviously tore by myself was a lot easier recovery. Less significant, yes, but just, I mean, it's still into the muscle layer, right? And still had stitches, so there's still that, and it was a lot easier that time for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think as well, even the research behind it, and obviously you would know as a midwife that I believe the body's way at healing from a natural tear versus an episiotomy is just a lot faster and a lot
Yeah,
easier generally.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. And your muscle, it then tears along the line of least resistance, and I suppose in a way that's probably easier to repair as well. Whereas,
Mm,
and I guess with my episiotomy, they would have done it before everything was really completely stretched out because only his legs were out. It wasn't like most of the head where everything's really thin and stretched out. It would have
mm,
been potentially a bit of a more difficult cut to make. And but yeah, anyway, it was definitely a lot better recovery just having that small second degree, and it wasn't along the scar line either, so nothing about that initial trauma repeated at all to my peri. So obviously your bodies can heal, and yeah, so that was really positive. And I had a few people at work say, like, why would you have a home birth when you've had that tear before? And I thought, well, if that's my big risk, and if that happens again, then I go to the hospital and they stitch me up. Obviously
yeah.
the chance of a really good recovery after tearing a second time is lower. Like if you've torn into that sphincter muscle for a subsequent time, it doesn't have as good healing rates. But I thought I had literally no issues with my first. And I also had the knowledge that I knew it happened because I had forceps on a head that, because he was breech, it hadn't molded to my pelvis whatsoever. So it was just a completely round, big head with forceps. Like, of course, your body is not going to want to stretch to that capacity, versus knowing that if I had a head down baby that could mold their way through the perineum and, well, your birth canal, and then stretch nicely on the perineum, and if we could control that birth, then of course my chance of tearing would be significantly less. Like I think I had good confidence in myself and my body that we had a good chance the next time. So definitely,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that could have been grounds both times. I could have opted for a cesarean with my first because of he was breech, and I could have had a cesarean quite easily with my second because of that perineal trauma. Both of them could be reasons to have cesareans, but I guess for me, they were not reasons to have one. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Totally. And then how was your overall postpartum experience?
Yeah, with hers, it was probably a little bit trickier in that I think I got into a bit of a deeper depression with hers, and it was also winter, and I'm not a winter person. But overall, it was really good. I think the first 8 weeks, it was a bit of an adjustment, especially to having two children after just one. It's very different.
Mm,
But
yeah.
I mean, my son was great in that he just kind of ignored that she existed, which was almost a bit sad, but it was a lot easier that he ignored her rather than had any aggression towards her or was constantly smothering her with love. It was actually quite an easy way to transition, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah, breastfeeding again was quite easy with her, and my milk supply wasn't quite as abundant this time, but in a good way, I think. As in, I obviously have had plenty for her, haven't lacked any at all, but not quite the level of mastitis and discomfort that I was
Mm,
consistently getting for a long time with my son. So yeah, postpartum was, yeah, good with her. I did ask a lot of my friends and like everyone. We had like a bit of a baby barbecue just to celebrate our pregnancy, and I was like, no one give us a gift, just bring us a meal for the freezer. And I think like three people did. And I was just like, that is the one thing that I feel a bit salty about, that I'm like, and then once she was born, lots of people came over with presents, and I'm going, we have everything from the first baby. I literally just want meals in my freezer, or like Uber Eats vouchers, or like I just actually don't want to cook. But anyway, I think that's like, if we ever had a third, I think that's definitely where I would be maybe a bit more assertive about,
yeah.
seriously, no presents, guys. We've got it, all the baby stuff, but a meal in the freezer is such a game changer.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we didn't have them with my first either, because he came at 37 weeks. I was fully expecting to have all those weeks of meal prepping, which we obviously didn't get. And
Mm.
then feeling so sick, I had no desire to cook at all, that's for sure. So yeah, didn't do a lot of that.
Yeah.
So that was the main downfall that hopefully
Yeah.
if we
Let's talk about postpartum essentials, guys. Not.
yeah. Yes, exactly. I do not
Yeah.
need another rattle that my baby still hasn't touched, but that's okay.
Or the 1,000 stuffed teddies that we've still got sitting in a room that I just don't
Yep.
even know what to do with.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly. It's like I
Yeah.
literally would have preferred you to get a freezer meal or something from the
Yeah.
supermarket, like
And
not
it would
even
have
if
been
it's
probably
not.
cheaper than the
Yeah.
$70 teddy that you've given me.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, that's okay. It is what it is. Yeah. So yeah, not long after her birth, obviously everyone like that day. My mum came over that day. My dad just dropped past very briefly to drop off some Panadol, I think, but I didn't. He thought he was getting sick, so he didn't stay. But yeah, everyone came over not long after. I'm definitely a people person, and I love people around me. And I think after feeling so sick in the pregnancies both times, I was just so excited to want to socialize again. So I think for me, that's just a difference as well. Lots of people want to isolate, not isolate, but really cocoon down with their baby and their partner and their other kids and not let the outside world in. But for me, it was like freedom at last from my pregnancy sentence. So yeah, definitely loved that social aspect both times.
Yeah.
Just not after 4 p.m. because that's when the those postpartum hormones really, I felt them and would be teary over anything and everything. But that was just my role. It was like, okay, I know at 4 p.m. I'll cry about anything, literally anything. But yeah, I know in my son's it was I cried because I was like, oh, my dog's 5 and he'll probably die before, because he's such a big dog. I was like, if he dies when my son's 5, because he'd be 10, then he won't remember him. And you're
Oh
just going down this
no.
like total spiral. So you're like, just cool it, it's
Yeah.
fine. But yeah, no.
Well, I've absolutely loved hearing your journey with both of your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum experiences. And I
Mm,
absolutely hate to wrap things up because I love this conversation so much, especially with a birth nerd like we were talking about
yeah.
before. But to wrap things up, what piece of general advice could you offer to women, whether it's to do with pregnancy, birth, or postpartum?
I think the main thing is that I think do your research and look into it and look into things. I don't necessarily think that winging it works particularly well. I think that then if you enter a system that you don't know enough about, or you make a decision based on just a friend's guide for your care, I think that things you don't always get the best outcome for yourself and what you needed. It's one of those areas that, if you were having surgery on something else, you do the research, you look it up, but people just seem to expect that they'll rock up to their GP and they'll get handed all the information, and it's just not the way things work particularly well. And so take control of it yourself and do that research, read the books, listen to the podcast, do what you need to do to figure it out. But yeah, that's my main piece of advice, because I think, yeah, a lot of people expect that, yeah, you'll just get told at all the antenatal appointments. And realistically, unless you've got a private midwife, they don't have the time to give you that information. That's not the way either the public or the private system work within hospitals. And the knowledge to get a private midwife, obviously you need to have that so early on in your pregnancy, because we just
Yeah.
don't have enough. The demand is so high. So obviously that would be great if everyone could have access to them, even if they didn't want to have home births, just to have that pre and postnatal care that I think is invaluable. But yeah, so that would be my main piece of advice, I think.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you so much, Anna, for coming on the podcast. Like I said, I've absolutely loved your story and I could pick your brain for hours. But thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm sure you can tell I would talk for hours. So
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Mama Village podcast. Check out the show notes for a link to the Mama Village Instagram page where I upload pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and motherhood resources. Please let me know what you think of today's show and what you would like to hear from the podcast by leaving a rating and review. If you like the show, please subscribe and leave a review on your podcast platform. If you would like to share your positive pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and motherhood story, or if you have education in the space to share, please send me a direct message on Instagram or email the.mamavillage@outlook.com. For all my listeners out there, thank you for your continuing support, and I will speak to you all in next week's episode.